Hello and welcome to a new episode here on the Wars Rebellion podcast. I'm your host, Niels Eichhorn, and today it is a massive bridging of time zones that we're doing from North Germany all the way to the Pacific Northwest. And in large part, it's a great pleasure because I am having somebody who I've talked with by email a number of times, and I've done previous interviews in written form with. So it's great to finally have um, Jim Jewell on here and finally get to see him in person. Jim is a professor and division chair, social and behavioral science at North Idaho College, which is located in Coeur d'Alene. Um, that is very far up there in the north of Idaho's Panhandle. Um, Jim loves ugly ties, and he got told that there's no ugly ties today on here. So if you're watching the video, sorry, you have to go to Facebook and look him up there, and you can see all the beautiful ugly ties he has. But Jim is quite an accomplished author. I have interviewed him for two of his books previous, Agents of Empire, the First Oregon Cavalry and the opening of the interior Pacific Northwest during the Civil War, and then what sort of similar to what we're looking at today, On Duty in the Pacific Northwest during the Civil War, where he looked at primary sources and gave a compilation. Now, moving up in the academic food chain, we're going to the Associate Provost for undergraduate programs at the University of North Georgia, almost near my old stomping grounds in Macon, Georgia. Eugene Van Sickle. He is a longtime professor in the region there. He is also an author with Reluctant Imperialists, U.S. Navy and Liberia, 1819 to 1845, which came out in the Journal of the Early Republic. And yeah, how did two people from the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast meet? They both went to the same PhD program at the University of West Virginia. So, guys, thank you so much for taking the time this morning, afternoon to meet and talk about your newest book, which I also should actually mention what we're talking about, which came out with this is Potomac Books, which is an imprint of University of Nebraska Press. Waging War for Freedom with the 54th Massachusetts, the Civil War Memoir of John W. M. Appleton. So, guys, very simple question. How did you get into Appleton?
Gene and I looked at your list, and so origin story sort of falls in my area. Our mutual field advisor for our dissertations, Dr. Ken Fonswolf, since retired, which tells you how old Gene and I are. Uh, he had mentioned it a number of times. We both had him for the seminar and the 400 level course, and so he would mention it. And after we left, I maintained a little bit better contact with Ken. And I had asked him a few times about if he was going to do something about it because he kept sort of hinting somebody should. And finally, after maybe the third time over the course of, I don't know, in 10 years or so, uh, Ken just said, why do you keep asking me? I have no plans to do anything with this. And at that point, I'm like, well, okay, then, well, probably we should. Appleton obviously there's quite a bit here given the topic on slavery. I'm primarily a military historian of the Civil War. Gene is an transatlantic slavery early nationalist. So obviously, given Appleton's writing, I was not going to be sufficient in a number of areas. I'd like to think I contributed areas where Gene would have been fine, but maybe I have a little bit more nuanced information on the war part. So that's how we kind of got to this topic.
So what Jim just suggested, Gene, is that he was sort of a third wheel on the wagon with you and Appleton.
That's not the way I took it. No. Thanks for having us, by the way, Niels. Uh, it's just a difference of where, right, our interests, right, we're in graduate school, right? Jim was always a Civil War historian from day one. I knew that
Mm,
about him. Um, uh, Back at that time, I actually didn't have a lot of interest in Civil War history.
mm,
Um, I was always a transatlantic slavery,
mm,
right, historian. That's what was really interesting to me. Um, but but yeah, this just seemed like a good opportunity for us to team up, bring the strengths that we both have, and get Appleton's memoir out there so it's available for a wider audience.
mm. So that kind of brings me to Jim, back to you a little bit, because this is not your first foray into editing a primary source collection. Why do you like it so much?
And it's not just the books. I would guess about 40% of my articles are probably edited pieces as
Mm,
well. Um, a lot of reasons, one of which is from a researcher standpoint myself, you know, it was easier if I could find them published.
hmm
Obviously I've done the stuff that we've all done, deep dives at archives, but as a Civil War guy living most of my time in the Northwest, I was a long ways away from sources, and that got a little expensive to, I used to know the people at the Virginia Historical Society pretty well because I went out so many times, but I was always appreciative of having primary stuff that
hmm
was public in published form. Uh, as I said, I did, until the first of the Oregon books, Oregon Cavalry books, I did a lot of articles. And uh, I probably because I'm type A, I like that quick turn,
mm,
much quicker turn on articles than you get with a book.
right.
And so that was, sort of building towards the first book on the Oregon Cavalry, where I went and called newspapers and archives. Those archives were local or regional, so it was easier. Um, you get into the perspective of whatever the experiences that you're writing about. I mean, I happen to be doing military during the Civil War, so get into their perspective on the war. If it's a good one, I like to think the ones I edited were because they were good ones, insightful, and Appleton especially is really detailed and he was really attentive. And so, you know, I like those opportunities. And, the book didn't, at the book level, it doesn't turn out to be any quicker than writing, as far as I can tell, um, having written a book in between these two. So, and these are great opportunities to bring this stuff forward for other researchers that were maybe facing some challenges like me. And for instance, yourself, I mean, look where you
Right.
are and you're doing Civil War.
Yes, I do love that. But what beyond that? Like what was sort of some audience, the markets that you suggested to the press? Do you kind of think in terms of like researchers? Did you think of like popular audience? Did you think of like undergraduate course adoption? Like who was sort of the audience you were aiming at?
We didn't think undergraduate audience per se, but if any professors out there are interested, we are more than happy to zoom into your classes if you're using our book. So, when we put the proposal together, it was, they asked the question, as you know, they ask what is your audience? And so it was serious scholars, of course, but also serious students
Hmm
because of the primary nature, but because he's so detailed, we do feel this has got a broader audience
hmm
or more people in a general reading, Civil War reading. I don't think, Gene, feel free to jump in here, but I don't think the average historical reader who reads David McCullough
Right.
or something like that is probably going to jump on this. But a really interested Civil War reader would probably still find this pretty
hmm
interesting because of the way Appleton writes.
Well, and I would add to that, right, because of the regiment that we're talking about here, right? Um, it's going to have some appeal to a broader audience,
hmm
um, and it just it's always struck me as odd that it's not that people didn't know that Appleton had this account, right, and it was in an archive, but it's just been sitting there, right, and people have not really made they've not made much use of it outside of right the specifics where he recounts the assault on Wagner. So it's a famous regiment. I think that Jim and I would probably both argue that it's the most famous black
Hmm.
regiment, and it's a different look
Hmm.
than what was already out there from letters of Shaw or so someone like that. Um, it's Appleton gets a lot into right the day to day
Hmm.
that it can be mundane, fine. Um, but that's what the war was, right? When they're involved in siege
Hmm.
for right weeks at a time, and so you learn a lot about it from that. And like I said, I think it's going to be of interest to just a generalist um, because it's about the 54th.
Yeah, and it's like if you look up at my heads there in the books, like I think there's a copy of like diaries and like stuff you get at Barnes and Noble that sometimes that's what you find. Like it's a diary or a letter collection that gets published that speaks to the state's history. So you never know. Maybe you can find yourself on Barnes and Noble one day and go on a book tour. Hmm.
Well, I haven't seen it at our local Barnes and Noble, but I'd be happy if they did.
I think Eugene has a better chance to see that in his and in the Atlanta
Yeah,
area. You guys
Maybe.
hopefully
have a Barnes
somewhere
and
there's.
Noble in Coeur d'Alene?
Yeah, it's in Spokane Valley actually, but
Okay.
we refer to the area as the Spokane Coeur d'Alene area, our region.
Okay. All right. That takes that. Um, so this is an interesting project because you took an archival document, you edited it, and prepared it for publication with sort of lengthy introductions to each section. Um, so a couple questions in that I want to kind of think about like the process and how did like start with like let's start with how you divided up the work. Was this like Gene did the transcription and Jim did sort of the annotation, or did both of you transcribe parts of it? How did you divvy this up? Hmm.
We divided all of it equally. We both transcribed,
Hmm.
and I would say that after we looked at it, after it went through one time, we came back to look at the whole completed after we
Hmm.
merged. I would say we transcribed somewhat poorly. We had
Okay.
we had a, we noticed a lot of typos, and it wasn't any, neither one of us was particularly bad at it or anything. I mean, his handwriting is actually pretty good.
Hmm.
His spelling and spelling is somewhat off, and his punctuation is particularly casual.
Problematic. I would say problematic is
Okay,
punctuation.
yeah,
Hmm.
spelling wasn't too bad, but yeah, the punctuation was yeah, okay, problematic works. But the handwriting was pretty solid, so
Good.
that wasn't really the issue. It was just it's a lot, and we were trying to make use of our time as quickly as we can, and so transcription divided that evenly. Divided, I think it's even, or maybe Gene's got one more chapter. I'm not sure in terms of uh, providing the primary introductory stuff
Hmm.
to the chapters in the intro and epilogue. And Gene had the front end, and right around Wagner, which we both did together for a previous article.
Hmm.
Was sort of the delineation point, and I did, uh, you know, I led on the stuff after Gene led on the stuff beforehand.
Hmm.
So it was it was a really even division of labor here, both on all of it. And so we were both engaged in all parts of what, you would
Hmm.
normally do as you go through and edit and annotate a piece.
Well,
And I would say too that right the way we split it out, it did. I think it paired up with sort of our right the areas that we trained in
hmm.
better because I have a better foundation when it comes to the subject of slavery in the United States, and that was important, right?
Hmm.
To provide that type of context
Hmm.
at the beginning of this memoir, and so that's why we split it up that way. And then once we get into the meat of the military campaigning, that's where Jim took over.
Hmm. So did you guys edit each other's work? Because you can't tell the voice difference between each other. Like
Oh
when
I'm
yeah,
you
we
happy
when
went.
about that.
Yeah, that's good. That means we did it well.
Yeah.
Um, but we did go back and forth.
hmm.
Actually, there were a lot of collaboration, a lot of editing,
Mm,
conversations, right? Those were pretty frequent,
mm,
just checking in with one another.
yeah.
Um, hey, I think this.
Hmm.
And then we would basically, right? So then we would talk about it and make a decision, right? And that's how we did it.
Mm. So what
Yep.
would you say was the hardest part of it?
The time difference.
Is it you
Right.
get a good job
Trying
on
to,
the East Coast, Jim? I mean, dang.
there was an opening at one point where Gene's at, but that didn't,
Yeah,
I
well, that probably
gave a serious
was
thought, but
Ann
I opted not to.
Tucker's job.
But
That was probably when Ann Tucker got hired, right?
have to talk to Gene. I don't know.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Well, Ann's been here a while,
Yeah.
so
I
that's
think I
been several
applied at
years
North
ago.
Georgia once or twice.
so
So,
I think time difference and challenges with any project. I mean, is
Mm,
trying to fit it in. But there were two of us trying to fit it in. But since we did divide it up, the initial work divided. We kind of were working on our part.
mhm.
First, and then okay, I've got this done. Take a look at it. And so just finding the time was a challenge. Not just the time zone difference, but the time to do it. I mean, became an
yeah,
issue. And
it's
go ahead,
yeah,
Jim.
it's we both have administrative functions at our institutions, and which those are our day jobs. So we have to fit this in. But yeah, the time difference. It's when we can connect, right, to have these important conversations. Um, that made it a little bit more challenging. I mean, we always figured out a way to do it, but and we won't talk about text messages
Right.
at 4 o'clock in the morning my time versus 1 o'clock his time.
Yeah. So the
Night
interesting thing,
owl.
yeah, I am an extreme night owl, and Gene gets up really early, so we actually cross over sometimes. Uh, he's probably one of the few people I could text at one my time. Well, probably 150 or two. It's on the East Coast and likely to be up. Although I try to avoid that unless I know he's up. If I've seen a text from him because my um, notifications are always off, so it doesn't matter if somebody sends me something. Um, I will say that process is fun, but for some people, I would not necessarily recommend it. We happen to be really good friends. We're friends with each other's families, and for a long time, and so it could be stressful. Not for us, I think. I'm not sure that how our wives would be happy about texting back and forth at 5 and 2 a.m., but wouldn't
See,
bother either one of us.
see, there's a benefit of having even more time difference because when Duncan and I text message each other when we were in the last stages of editing of finishing our book, it was like I was getting up, he was still awake. I was not yet in bed, but getting towards it, and he was getting up, and it was always perfect. Like, oh, yeah, let's meet at 9 o'clock. That's 6 my time. Perfect. Uh, there's something
Yeah,
to be said
well,
there.
we've known each other long enough that we kind of know each other's routines and
Yeah. Well, I guess I could ask about like all the dirty secrets about Jim now in grad school, but I'll spare us that.
We were both married with kids. We were the boring guys in our group because we were married with kids.
yeah, the exciting times for us were at Jay's Daily Grind, sitting there drinking mocha. That was about as exciting as it got.
Yeah.
True point. True point. Well said. Um, so I going back to the book, I did notice that like sometimes when you have edited collections, the authors decide like when there's like a name introduced or like a location or like anything of that nature that they do a footnote and kind of provide explanation, and you kind of decided not to do that as far as I could tell. Was there sort of a thought process behind of like how far you were going to annotate the book and or the manuscript, how much you were going to explain things, or was this sort of like um just let's just not do that?
Well, I think that part of the plan, either intentional, well, maybe not plan, but part of the outcome, intentional or not, was that Appleton did a pretty good job of explaining a lot of people
Hmm.
and places. We did some of that. At least I feel like we did some of that, but we didn't overdo it. There
Hmm.
can be a point where there's a tipping moment where, like, okay, well, you've done too much, and we've all read edited collections where it's just too much.
Hmm.
And you can also underdo it as well. I'm hoping we navigated it
Hmm.
successfully down the middle, but I think we leaned a little more towards assuming the audience would have a pretty good understanding of larger ticket.
Right.
Nobody's annotating William Tecumseh Sherman. You don't need to do that. But and then some of the cases with the men, we've had stuff in there, but you just don't know a lot.
Hmm.
I mean, they're pretty obscure.
Yeah.
We knew
Mhm.
enough from the compiled service records to, like the background when they
Hmm.
enlisted, but that might be about it.
Yes. Yeah. So it was, yeah, we discussed all that. But we didn't want to turn this into something incredibly burdensome. The notations that we did end up right often putting in there were because the memoir diverged from the letter,
Hmm.
right? So because it's all based off of his letters to his wife.
Hmm.
We thought that was important, right? To call out those places,
Hmm.
or things that just were, if it puzzled us when we read it, there's probably a notation there, right? And there are a few things because he'll mention some things once in a while. I'm like, well, what's he referring to here? And so that leads to a little side research project and
Hmm.
figure out what it was, and we notated those. But
Right.
if we knew what it was, I think to Jim's point, we kind of assumed that, right, a general reader would probably know too,
Hmm.
and so we didn't need to put a notation there.
Right. Um,
I love it. Let me follow up with one real quick, Niels.
yeah.
Gene did most of they did all of the on-site legwork. Let me rephrase. He did all of that. He's the one that went to Morgantown. I contacted a now completed PhD student who to see if he could make copies for us. And fortunately, he already had some. In fact,
Mm.
he did it for Lorianne Foote's
Oh.
book. And so he had them ready, and we were able to supplement his meager graduate student income, as we well remember those days. But given the proximity, Gene went up and actually did the on-site. So he really got hands-on and got to really go through the thing, something I did not do.
Mm. So there wasn't quite a 50-50 split because he had to go and travel to his alma mater a little bit.
Uh, as I like to do to point out at the map, I'm a lot further away from Morgantown than Georgia.
Well, slightly, slightly. So let's get towards the book more in how would you classify it? I mean, it's a memoir, but it's also sort of a regimental history of the 54s. And oftentimes when we like I'm thinking here of Adam Donaby's this book in part, but there's sort of a growing perception that we have to be cautious with some of these regimental histories because they're written after the fact, they're embellished at times. Authors kind of want to make sure their unit looks nice in these. So, like, how did you feel about that? Was that something that you had in your mind as you were working through Appleton's memoirs that you kind of were like, okay, we need to be cautious about it, or were you kind of feeling like, yeah, we can trust this guy?
Well, going in, this is where our division of expertise, all of the slavery background and the abolitionist background is just really Gene's area of expertise. But we get to the military side of it. I've gone through and having my own collection down in my basement library, just a huge number of regimental histories. Um, and so, uh, you know, I particularly was well aware of, you hit on all the things, they're writing them for their primary audience is each other.
Hmm.
So of course they're going to make them look good.
Yeah.
Most, and I'm qualifying that, and I'll explain in a second, but most are written after the war.
Hmm.
Um, there's that Wells one on Hampton's cavalry, which is written during, and I'd like to think, if you're looking at the memoir here, it's partly regimental history, and I think it's that's probably fair.
Mhm.
That's written sort of during the war because he writes the letters,
Right.
but he does come back. But yeah, they are defensive
Mhm.
often, defend what our actions were or
Mhm.
explain them away. They're targeting their own audience of
Mhm.
regimentals, and I would argue, as I've in the last dozen or so years reading World War I material for other projects, that's standard.
Mhm.
You get regimental histories are normally by committee, somebody's appointed. As I included in the book, a lot of the ones that we know in the Civil War go through kind of a committee peer review.
Mhm.
And so yeah, as you said, they're not going to let anything through that makes them look bad.
Mhm.
So you have to be careful. As far as how we felt about that, I think it's, both of us can attest to this, and I'll offer my thoughts and defer to Gene after that. But Appleton, if you compare him to Emilio, a true regimental history, which
Mhm.
by all accounts, by people in the field more eminent than the three of us, uh, trusted its accuracy, and we've concurred.
Mhm.
And so comparing it to the Emilio book on the 54th, it's pretty accurate.
Mhm.
Then you look into the official records, and
Mhm.
its accuracy is easy to track and confirm. So I think we felt pretty early on it was not one of those ones where we get to be skeptical about any one part. And I've encountered manuscript versions of those
Mhm.
or archival versions, and when looking at projects and decided not to go with them. So that was a deciding factor for this to go forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, I actually didn't have too many concerns about the reliability. And you can tell if you have the letters, right, and compare it with the memoir itself, you can tell where he is editorializing, right?
Mhm.
Um, but it's not, he doesn't do it to change, right, sort of the view of the regiment,
Mhm.
right? The things that he cuts out are the more deeply personal
Mhm.
pieces, right? The stuff that's in the letters, right, where he's asking about family or
Mhm.
right, those types of things. He is critical of some of the leadership after Wagner, so
Surprise, right?
yes, that's that. No, that's shocking, but yeah, he cleans that up in the memoir, so it's a whereas the letter is completely unvarnished,
Mhm.
um, and so in that sense, it is like a regimental history,
Mhm.
right? But it's also peculiar because the way it starts out, um, he starts out just literally transcribing the letters,
Mhm.
right? Even to the point of here's the salutation, right? So dear so and so, right? Um, but he departs from that pretty quickly to it becoming a real memoir
Mhm.
based upon the letters. But I never had. I mean, it was pretty obvious that in terms of accuracy, uh, he did a really good job of putting this together.
Mhm. Oh, I kind of expected you to go on there. Sorry.
That's okay. Uh,
All right, good. So I want to briefly also talk about sort of the historiography of the 54s, and I mean you're kind of in company because I know Kevin Levine is writing the Shaw biography right now too, and we'll see when that comes out, hopefully soon. But let's start with a movie actually, since obviously Glory is the perfect segue into a historiography and the kind of thing that makes the 54 so well known popularly. Um, so which character's Appleton?
he's not in the movie.
How dare they forget that guy?
The movie's only actual character is Shaw. Everybody else is a composite or completely fictionalized. And I mean, Morgan Freeman, I assume, is supposed to be Carney, more or
Hmm.
less. And then it's hard to tell who Carrie, is it Elwes is? He would probably be, what do you think, Gene? Ned Hollowell, probably?
I
Uh,
would think that that's who he's meant to portray as the Hallowell, but um, I don't think he captures it very well.
Yeah. Well, next thing
I
you're
guess we won't
telling,
be asking the Mr. Ellis to write a preface to any future editions.
well, we're not the History at the Movies podcast, so you're good. That they'll probably not find out about it.
Yeah,
I will add that, we talk about glory and the influence, and
Mm,
as I just listened to Kevin's Emerging Civil War podcast, and he makes a pretty good point. That's 30 plus years ago. So
yeah.
the younger audience is not going to probably has not seen it unless they saw part of it in a history
Mm,
class, which is probably
that's
the
true.
worst setting to do it because they're going to be adverse probably from the get-go.
I mean, it's interesting when you think about that, right? Of like how like old that movie is, and like I saw it in Germany in dubbed version the first time, and I think I had to record it on tape because it came in the late hours, like the second set of Western quote unquote movies because of the blood and guts that were involved in it. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is still sort of the piece on the 54s, and it sort of drove sort of the perceptions of like what this unit was about. And I think that's it felt when I read your work that it felt a little bit like you were arguing against sort of this like perception in the public that no, the 51st doesn't disappear after Wagner. It continues on. It's a unit that is still alive.
Yeah, that was a big
yeah,
component for us was uh, that every previous work had stopped completely or fizzle out quickly
Mm,
after Wagner, and we take it. Appleton, of course, goes on, but he doesn't go to the very end.
hmm
So we jump in and do editorial voice
hmm
to take it to the conclusion of returning back to Boston. I mean, which is in that sense, I'm pretty happy that we're basically the only complete history, even though the last bit is summarized of the regiment, because the more famous
hmm
one that came out in the was it in the 60s, early 60s, I think. The
I
one
think
that
65. Yeah,
yeah, one
around
gallant rush.
65. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that ends with Wagner. I mean, like they just disbanded them or something.
Yeah. That is one of the, and I don't mean to fault, right, the producers of Glory and so forth, right? I think it I personally like the movie, right?
hmm
I think it's a great watch. Um, but it does leave you with that perception that they get annihilated at Wagner, and that's the end of the story.
hmm
And it's far from it. Um, One of the things that I find really perplexing about this is that when they finally do take Wagner, the 54th is there,
hmm
right? Um, and that's not part of the narrative, really,
hmm
right? It's like they disappear. Outside of maybe a Lusty and Honey Hill, you don't hear much about the 50, but the fact that they spent the next 2 months,
hmm
right, engaged in siege warfare,
hmm
and that they were there when the fort fell, uh, gets lost in all of this.
hmm So you kind of thinking about it, do you feel like it's an issue of perspective because Glory is sort of a myopic piece of Shaw as the commanding officer, and you're not doing Shaw. You're looking at one of the other officers in the regiment who doesn't die, who continues on, and it gives that ability to kind of look beyond it. And is it like, I mean, I'm also thinking of the monument in Boston, right? It's like Shaw in the foreground, sitting on horse, the African American soldiers sort of disappearing in the background. It's a lot of the story of the 54th is very focused on that white guy.
Yes. Jim, if you want to,
Yeah.
you were going to
So
say something.
yeah, I think one of the focus on Shaw really loses the regiment, especially after Wagner.
hmm
Uh, I hope Appleton, that our work on Appleton's memoir helps bring the light into a broader and bring to light a broader group of the unit. But
Mm,
again, he's the white officer. He's not. We do have the two good books based on letters written during the war for newspapers from African American soldiers. But
mm,
had this been this level of detail from an African American soldier, this would have been probably published a long time ago. If anybody, because enough scholars have used it. Like Lorient's not the only
mm,
one. There's been others that have visited the archives and used it. So this is a very valuable piece, but it is again still a white officer's perspective. However, I at least think he does a really good job of commenting and bringing into his narrative as he's telling it to his wife in the letters about the troops that serve under him. I mean, I think we learn more there than we do from the Shaw letters
mm,
about the troops. And the movie, of course, is, not only does it end prematurely in terms of what the regiment does, because the protagonist is killed, but it also makes Shaw not just central, which is fine, it's the movie, you need your lead character, but it gives him more presence than he actually
mhm,
had. He's hustling and a lot in during the training months.
mm,
He's not really there. I
mm,
mean, he's in and out, and so you don't see that. It's the movie carries it as if he's there. That's not the case. Appleton, I mean, this is after Shaw dies, but Appleton will be acting commander on they kind of rotate between the senior leaders there. When the colonel's gone, the lieutenant colonel and then Appleton are like officer of the day for the whole regiment. Although in his case, sometimes it was several days,
mm,
and then a couple of times for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, now, I think that's an important point to bring up, right? So it's like the movie presents right Shaw in that way, but I think the other accounts we have, right, that Shaw is kind of distant from the men,
mm,
right? But Appleton, as a company commander,
mhm,
right, is with them daily, right? He's around them much more, and while he might not be personally experiencing some of the issues they are, the discrimination, right, that they
mm,
face, but but he voices it,
mhm,
right? In his letters to his wife, right? It affects him. You can tell that it affects him,
mhm,
and so the issues that matter to them matter to him.
mhm,
And when you read the letters in particular, you can see, right, that passion comes out, right?
mm,
Um, the thing I was most struck about, right, in this with Appleton is he felt that it was necessary for him. He had to impose discipline on the men,
mhm,
but he really didn't like it,
mhm,
right? And the thing he um, hated the most was, executions,
mm,
right? Um, and I do wonder what he might say if we could have a conversation with him about that. But just from the letters,
mm,
right, and what he says in the memoir itself about, right, here these guys are, they're fighting for freedom, they're fighting to end slavery, but yet they're being executed, right, because they've broken some military law,
mm,
right? Um, and so there's this contradiction that he's paying attention to.
mm,
He's powerless to do anything about it,
yeah,
but I don't think you get that from, right, Shaw's letters.
mm. Well, I'm kind of feeling like I'm gonna have a hard time when trying to get Kevin on here when his Shaw biography comes out.
Well,
I just to go ahead, Gene.
I was going to say, I mean, I'd be curious to see what he's going to have to say about that, and he might disagree
Hmm.
with what I just said.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe I should
but
bring all of you into a conversation and see how like the two different perspectives kind of mash
Right.
up.
I listened to that podcast just the other day, as I mentioned, and Kevin's, from what I got from my takeaway was, yeah, he's pretty critical of the the popular perception of Shaw.
Hmm.
He's not having it. I mean, certainly, Kevin, if you hear this, if you disagree, let me know. Um, but
I'll
that was my
tack him.
take. Yeah, well, good. I mean, he and I communicate a little bit through Messenger, just a little. But I didn't get the sense that he was certainly not buying into that. And
Mm.
so he's going. It sounds like he's going to bring a new perspective, a more
Hmm.
realistic perspective to Shaw. So I don't think we would be too far apart.
But let's since Eugene opens the doors to this, let's get into the book a little bit because that was one of the big pieces that you had as sort of a reoccurring theme throughout the chapters, that issue of punishment. And it didn't feel just like that. I mean, yes, Appleton disagrees with some of the harshness of the punishment sometimes, but it also seems that he didn't agree with it because of from a racial perspective, that he felt African Americans were, or his African American soldiers were more harshly punished for things that white soldiers got away with.
Yes, yeah, he comments about that multiple times, and it shows up in other work on black regiments, right? They, in some ways, military justice, right, reinforces, right, sort of this racial system,
Hmm.
right? And it's this is me sort of reading into what he had to say, so I
Hmm.
want to preface it that way. But I think he's aware of it. Appleton understands the importance of military discipline,
Hmm.
right? And he says that I'll do it, and he does lay hands on right his men, and he did assault some of them,
Hmm.
right? In his enforcement of military discipline. Um, but his awareness of that before he actually becomes a leader of black soldiers, right? I think it evolves,
Hmm.
right? Especially after he starts to see the speed in which um, trial and then execution takes place
Hmm.
once they're on Morris Island. Um, it gets to the point where he won't go unless he's directly ordered, right, to executions. And he writes a couple of times about Montgomery, right, who executes soldiers for desertion,
Hmm.
right. There's that one example where a soldier, right, is caught trying to desert. Montgomery asked him point blank, "So what do you have to say for yourself?" And the guy's like, basically nothing. He said, "Well, you die at 9 o'clock then," and that's the end of it.
Hmm.
Um, and Appleton, my read on this is Appleton thought it was wrong
Hmm.
for such swift and violent,
Hmm.
right, discipline.
Hmm. Jim, you want to add something?
No, the Dean's covered it.
Right. Do you feel like that, like, I mean, you note in the introduction, I think it was that Appleton on purpose wanted to be part of a black regiment. Do you kind of feel that contributes to his perception about, like, and sympathies for some of the issues that these soldiers are raising in regard to, say, discipline, but then also, as we'll talk about in a minute, maybe the pay issue?
Well, I'll hold off on the pay issue since you've laid it for down the road. But I mean, one thing we know for sure is that we don't know a lot about Appleton's pre-war abolitionist uh,
Mm.
sentiments. I mean, his family is pretty clearly abolitionist. We don't know to what degree he was.
Mm.
We don't. There's just not a record of him being very aggressive, very outspoken.
Mm.
But the family was in those circles to be sure. So his
Mm.
exposure, we're inferring, but his
Mm.
exposure was certainly there. To what degree was he interested in that? But he's aggressively trying to get a commission with Higginson's regiment,
Mm.
former slaves. I mean, he's lobbying, he's getting people to write letters for him, and was going to get a commission had
Mm.
the 54th opportunity not come up. So by the time that happens, so sometime between what we don't know pre-war, what level, and we just couldn't find it. I mean,
Hmm.
unfortunately, as we all know, going back on through the paper trail, when they're our field, these people aren't alive. We can't ask anybody. Um,
Sometimes that's good.
uh, so we can't answer those questions. But
Hmm.
clearly, by 62, he's ready to go and is eager to join in the fight. And then
Hmm.
his writing in the memoir, and Gene can attest more to, there's not a lot of difference what he's told me, and what he copied. Um, in the letters, it's pretty clear that, the pay issue especially just really brings it forward, I think, about the importance of what they're doing, and he wants to be part of that. And his post-war comments
Hmm.
as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think he becomes more, um, I guess I would use the term advocate for this.
Hmm.
He's committed. He's clearly committed to the cause,
Hmm.
and he's just waiting for the opportunity, right? I mean, it's clear by 1862 that if if Lincoln's administration makes this move to allow black soldiers, right, to be raised,
Hmm.
that he wants to be part of that.
Right.
Um, because he, like I said, like Jim said, like we couldn't find any
Hmm.
like sort of public evidence that he was active as an abolitionist,
Hmm.
right? Um, but once we get to this tipping point of where they now have permission to raise black regiments, he wants to be part of that,
Hmm.
um, and is doing everything he can. Like he's working every network he has access to try to get a commission to one of these regiments.
Hmm.
But I think it once he's in it,
Hmm.
then it becomes something that he will monitor. I guess I'll use that one, monitor the rest of his life.
Hmm. Which in many ways it's sort of interesting too, because I mean I don't deal usually with African American units during the Civil War. I deal with the foreigners. And there's a lot of foreigners that are usually officers in African American regiments because white Americans don't want to do that because they, for whatever reason, feel that not the pathway to glory. But it's interesting that Appleton is not joining a regiment beforehand, right? Like you have Shaw who joins units beforehand, but here's a man who purposefully waits the first year of the war to then go as an African American unit.
Yeah, yeah. He's not like the other officers for the regiment in that most
Hmm.
of them had already joined other regiments.
Yeah.
Even right the Quakers, right, the Hallwell brothers, right, they had already joined up and were serving in other regiments when the 54th is formed.
Hmm.
But yeah, Appleton waits.
Hmm.
Sort of unique and he's waiting, and it's not like he's, because a lot of these officers were young.
Mm-hmm.
Louis Emilio is, I mean, a number of them are teenagers.
Yes.
But Appleton in his 30s, he's the oldest guy.
Mm.
So, I
Mm.
mean, you could say like, hey, maybe Louis Emilio is waiting because he's just kind of too young to serve, really. But what's
Mm.
Appleton at 30? I think 35. I think, if I can remember correctly.
Well,
Um,
so he was born in 32, so he's
thir-
30 in
yeah.
62.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas, yeah,
Mm.
Emilio is 16, right? Because I mean, he's only 17 when they're at Wagner.
Whoa. Wow, that's crazy to sing, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
guy ends up commanding the regiment at almost 18 because everybody else is injured or dead.
Right, right, yeah. Good God. Can you imagine as an 18-year-old having that responsibility on your shoulder? Like one of our students?
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, that's a crazy one. But take it away, pay issue, since it is pretty much almost in every single chapter of the book. So, um, yeah, tell us about the pay issue.
Well, I mean, that was an issue that went on for 18 months,
Mm.
right? I mean, that's actually how long those men went without pay. It took an act of Congress to change that. And Jim can talk about the Quaker Oath and so forth, but um, this is one of the areas where I think Glory, right, to bring that back, does a really good job of highlighting,
Mm.
right? But I think it also distorts it a bit,
Mm-hmm.
right? By making it seem like it wasn't an issue for as long as it was,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? These are men who have volunteered,
Mm.
right, to fight for this cause, to serve the United States, right? While they have family back at home, they're being evicted,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who are going hungry, and when they're fighting at Wagner,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, the ones that were from New York City, right, have family members being killed.
Right.
Um, all the while not getting paid. Now that multiple times in Appleton, this is why it's in multiple chapters, because multiple times the paymaster comes out to pay the regiment, and but they only want to pay them the $7 a month, right? And they just flat out refuse. Like, no, we signed up under these terms,
Mm-hmm.
and so they refuse over and over, even when, right, Governor Andrew in Massachusetts, right, offer to make up the difference. It's become principle by this point
Mm-hmm.
that we want paid the same as white soldiers, and we will not accept anything less than that. And there is this one moment. Um, it's actually I can't remember now if it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, but the men made a joke out of this, right? So they're playing games, right? And they tied a pair of pants and $13 to the top of a pole and grease the pole, and so whoever can get to the top of it gets the pants and 13
Remember that.
bucks, which is what they were promised to be paid, right? That's just a quick sideline, but right, that to me that was an important moment because the men understood what this was about, right? And the principle. So it becomes about principle that they won't accept anything less because they knew if they did, they've already faced discrimination. They're facing discrimination as soldiers. And if they accept that, right? And you see this over and over, not just in this book, but the literature, right? This is about manhood,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they sacrifice that if they accept anything less than the $13.
I will add that, and I'm happy to explain the Quaker Oath as well. But I will add that the pay issue is the most important one because the government makes it so, because they don't honor what, because Appleton is recruiting saying you're going to get the $13 the same as any other unit, because that's what he was led to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's why it's so important. I mean, one, they were told that at the beginning, and as Gene's pointing out, this is about equality, and they get it. Less important, I think, than that, but also demonstrating the issue of equality in the ranks is the later fight over getting African American officers,
Mm-hmm.
which Governor Andrew plays a key role in making that happen. Basically, sort of taking the government's hand and saying, eventually they kept blocking it, and he said, "Well, if you don't, I will." With the power of the governor's head over state regiments. But the Quaker Oath, not to be confused with the Quaker Oats, and if I'd have been really smart, I would have had props here, um, was a way around it, because what the government said is if you owed, basically if you were enslaved, but it was like if you owed labor to an owner, and I can't remember the date, Gene, so if you got it, help me out here.
What, April 61?
Well, yeah, as of,
As
but
of
this
it,
is
yeah.
this is in 60.
Oh, you mean when they passed the law?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
64.
I think it's 64. Um, and so if you owed anybody uh, bondage labor, or in other words, you were enslaved as of April 61, then you would not get the amount. So the commander of the 54th comes up with this Quaker oath. It says, he's phrasing is, did anyone have the right to claim your labor? And of course, all these men, most of whom were free anyway, it's almost all. But the way around that is they're like, well, nobody had the right to force me to work for them. And so that becomes the Quaker oath that gets around it. Although in that regiment's case, the 54th, most of them, nearly all had been free.
Yeah, but what that means though is like the first and second South Carolina, for example, which right, those were the original
Mhm.
regiments raised from slaves. Um, they don't get the $13 a month. They get seven.
Well, that's, I think, also like, I mean, I want to go with discrimination in a minute, but that's sort of the misconception of the movie often that it's like, oh, these were slaves, right? I'm thinking of, like, I don't remember, was it Denzel Washington's character?
Yeah, Denzel's.
Yeah, that it's sort of like plays the, illiterate slave, and it's like, no, these weren't, you know. Um, but I think the other part that I want to get to was the payment issue is that, right? It's sort of like you're fighting for your country, you're fighting for the freedom of your people, you're being discriminated against in pay, but you're also discriminated against with regard to politics. Because we haven't established yet that you're going to get the right of vote. You're still under the Dred Scott decision with regard to citizenship. So it is really sort of like in many ways a fight for the hope for a better future, but you don't know if it will be a better future.
Yeah, and they don't. That's it's a gamble,
Mm,
right? Um, to what extent the men understand that, I'm not even sure that. I mean, it you could infer from right what the officers say that
mm,
they seem to understand that. Um, but I would say there's an expectation,
mm,
right? When this is done, that will be the reward, is
mm,
citizenship at the end. Um, and if those, like, even with the pay issue, the officers are sort of in lockstep about this. If we're not going to do this the way it should be done, then you should send these men home,
mm.
because it's a bait and switch,
Yeah.
right? And you should send them home, right? Um, but they also seem to know if they get equality on pay, citizenship will follow.
Mm. Anything to add, Jim?
No, that sums it up well.
All right, good. Hmm. So the I'm going to do big picture now. So your book really, or the memoir really chronicles the activities of the regiment. Yeah, when Appleton is there, obviously, but um after Wagner, he's away for a little while. At the end, he's away for a little while. Um, but I think one of the things that I enjoyed about it, and that I kind of felt could have been highlighted a little bit more, I had a little criticism there maybe, is like when I taught the Civil War class once, I kind of pointed out to the students that are like, think about this. Army of the Potomac, 365 days a year in 1863. How much fighting do you actually do? Maybe 20 days? Maybe. For 11 months, you don't do anything but sit around, drill, march, cook your food, sit in a tent, fight fight mosquitoes and mud, and it felt like when you read through the memoir, it is exactly that. Right? It's the dull siege operations around Charleston. It's the kind of marching occupation duties around Jacksonville. And it spoke so much to what the reality of soldiering was during the Civil War.
Yeah,
It,
that's one of the great. Go ahead, Gene.
I say it does do that. I think it's monotonous, right?
Hmm.
Um, but here's one of the this is I think a shortcoming of the memoir. Um, when they are engaged in siege warfare, it's actually pretty deadly,
Hmm.
right? Now, they make a big deal. The officers made a big deal out of the amount of labor spent in fatigue duty,
Hmm.
right? But the fatigue duty they were doing was under fire,
Hmm.
right? With snipers, right, and artillery. And Appleton, like I said, so this is a weakness of his memoir, because he doesn't talk about the fact that right they're losing men weekly, right, when they're engaged in siege. Now he wasn't there for that part, so we can
Hmm.
forgive him for not right covering that. Um, but yeah, it I guess for lack of a better word, it seems boring, right? This camp life, it's routine, right? They do parade, right? They drill,
Hmm.
and they dig. They do a lot of digging. Um, but it's but yeah, I mean, to your point, right? You're not fighting, right, in these epic contests
Hmm.
on a daily basis. And you know this, right? Disease kills a lot more guys than combat. And the 54th was subject to that, the same as the rest of the regiments.
I'll add to that and Gene's getting on a key point is that so much of the daily routine was more dangerous than most people think.
Hmm.
It's drudgery to be sure, but it's dangerous drudgery. Um, that mundane, if you will, sort of the daily life routine really struck our editor. He liked that, and understanding that it's service is routine. I will.
Hmm.
My good friend there is an actual did a tour of duty. He's a veteran, so he knows the day in day out drudgery much better than I would.
Hmm.
Uh, of service. So I think it's one of the strengths. Actually, it is a weakness. He doesn't do more, but I think there's more there than most memoirs you see.
Hmm.
So while he could have done more, I think there's more in his book than most memoirs about the day to day
Hmm.
routine. So it's kind of is the glass half empty or half full situation compared to everything else that we're likely to see.
I do
Yeah,
enjoy that I found some things that you disagree on.
I'm critical of Appleton in this regard, right? About this one thing, right? Um, but at the same time, I'm also fascinated because he writes about all of this other stuff. It's like you don't expect. Like he's talking about right the guys being right threatened and chased, and in one case, a guy gets bitten by a shark,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Um, you know, you not what they're at war,
Hmm.
right? Um, and he's talking about guy getting bit by a shark or the men being terrorized by an alligator. You know, um,
You even have dental care. There was a brief passage on dental care, like wow.
yes, yes. And let's not forget about the rebel flies,
Hmm.
right? They're constantly biting everybody.
Yeah, I think Appleton, for those that are investigating the impact of the environment on the war and
Hmm.
service, I think Appleton is going to be a valuable source for people, and we've made that much more available than it was when it was just in the collection at WVU. So I mean, he does get into all these sort of unique and sort of odd in some ways. The sharks and the alligators certainly.
Hmm.
I mean, most of these guys are from New England or the Middle States. And I imagine the idea of an alligator, or plus the malaria with the mosquitoes, is it's just such a weird experience for them.
Yeah, but I think the other part with that is sort of like it's the environmental, and you just forced me that I'll hate you for this, Jim. Thank you very much. I will now have to look through your book a second time to make sure I can use it for my own book on the Savannah campaigns. Um, but sensory history has become so big in the recent years, and it struck me how much of that is in there too, right? Of those things that in like 40 years ago, historians just glance over and were like, nah, not important. And now we're looking at that, and it's like it's always been there, just we didn't pay attention to it.
This is where I think as educators, we tell students, majors, not the surveys so much, but majors, uh, you know, the history, the field is evolving. I mean, new
Hmm.
stuff is discovered. That is an obvious thing, but new perspectives are out there
Hmm.
and new questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that Appleton, and this is getting a little bit ahead on his experience, but the heat stroke. I
Hmm.
mean, how do we not think about that more for northern guys,
Yeah.
down there in the heat and the humidity that
Hmm.
weren't, this wasn't their climate, they weren't used to it. That has a verifiable impact on service when you're losing men who can't take because the clothes they wear.
Right.
I can't even imagine how miserable that would have been.
Yeah.
You know,
No,
so
like where you say that, I remember the day when I took my students to Vicksburg and I made them go up Sayers Approach. And we were all in summer clothes, like shorts, t-shirt. And they were exhausted by the time they got up there. And I was like, seeing now woolen clothes, woolen uniform, musket, cartridges, and you're under fire. Like, I mean, and it was the same time of year too. Like, it was June, just in the time of the battle.
I mean, even we take the most famous moment for the lay person is Pickett's charge. I mean, those guys
Yeah.
are coming across about a mile in wool in the
Hmm.
July heat. I'm surprised more of them didn't just pass out before they got anywhere near there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And Pennsylvania, right? It might be a northern state, but it gets pretty warm in July.
Yeah, we've both lived there in different parts of the state. So yeah, the by the way, as a Northwest guy, the humidity in the East is incredible. I mean, at least from New England, you'd know about humidity. It just wouldn't be the humidity quite the same. But I got out of a Ryder truck in Morgantown and about passed out because 90 degrees and 80% humidity.
It does suck that we always have to move in the summer, right? As academic people.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
That's also right. More challenging in Georgia because the humidity here is a different level. Um,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
but, but, but yeah, to Jim's point, right? And, when they're fighting, there's, I, we found reference like, what was it, Jim? Was 130 or something like that the one day?
110
Or
the day the
110,
guy died. The one of the guys died was 110.
110 degrees and a wool uniform in South Carolina. That
And no
sounds like
shade.
sounds like a great time to me.
Hey, no, no, thank you. No wonder the guy had heat stroke. Um, nuts. Well, they went even further south to Florida. And
Although Alesti, the battle is earlier in the year, so it's
hmm,
not the
Yeah,
temperature
that
is
was
going
in
to be,
February.
yeah. So that bad outcome for the Union, and but at least it wasn't July.
Yeah, yeah.
well,
Appleton doesn't report any heat stroke in Alusty.
oh God. I guess there were no hurricanes either, right?
Not while they were
Since we're,
there.
Yeah,
since we're,
not that he mentions anyway.
oh, we're having good times there. Um, so where we're going to take this now because this took us into interesting directions there. Um, so when we, I don't want to do kind of blow by blow because I kind of want to leave that to readers in part to kind of read through your books and kind of discover all the different stories of it. But And you mentioned that I think what Gene was it that you have this, especially during the sieges, constant engagement, the fighting. And I remember in Petersburg when I was there was a student group that the reminders there too, right? We're talking about a year of operations. There's no downtime. There's no like break. It's like you're shooting all day, you're under fire all day. And that's sort of what you're experiencing in Charleston too, that not on the same scale, obviously, but this constancy of engagement with very little downtime, unless you go swim with the sharks. And but A, I found it very interesting. There, I think, which chapter was this? Chapter 5. You have this reference to like Appleton observing the burial, and it's like, yeah, it just happened. Like there's no kind of like it's not special to them. It's nothing like it's a daily routine kind of feel. And it
Mhm.
seems like they're kind of desensitized towards death in that. And how much does trauma play into that as well? Having kind of that siege experience during the war.
Mhm. Well, and I do think you're right that they become kind of numb to it,
Hmm.
right? And they're not, I won't say they're immune to it because they see it happening, but
Right.
um, the fatigue duty that they are doing so often just it wears out just the equipment, but it wears out the men. There's a segue there back to the pay issue, right? Because of the fatigue duty they're doing, so they're wearing out their uniforms, right? But they're not getting the payment,
Mm-hmm.
right, which includes a clothing allowance. So they're looking pretty shabby about November
Mm-hmm.
of '63. Um, but all the while you have this sort of trickle of death. And you get a little bit of it from Appleton. He's not saying about like what's causing it, right? He doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes he'll tell you that so and so was shot, or we had a bombardment and it killed this many guys. But you have this trickle of a handful of guys kind of on a daily basis that are dying, and it's part of the fatigue duty, and so he'll comment on it, perhaps, but he doesn't tell you who it was. He doesn't say if it was his regiment or somebody else's.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there. He acknowledges that it's there, um, but not necessarily worth comment.
I think the deaths, and I don't want to call them routine because it's not mentioned a lot, but it's and Gene talked about this earlier, is when there's an execution of a soldier. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
one that does seem to really impact Appleton much more so.
Mm-hmm.
Being killed in a siege while you're digging trenches or whatever is senseless as well, but it's at a whole different level when you're executing a soldier for offenses as you've noted that would not have gotten somebody killed if they were white.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I think that is the one exception to where you're reading Appleton's more detailed, more reflective.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. That's so we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like three major engagements that the regiment is at, right? Wagner, Ulster in Florida, and then what you have the Appleton's the sort of last engagement there, Honey Hill area. So like how would you rank these? Like which one is the for the regiment itself sort of the most important moment? Like is it Wagner's that this is the moment where they kind of it's not where they get their feet wet as a soldiers because you have skirmishes before that. Is it because it's the most devastating moment of the regiment that's why it has sort of a big impact, or is it more the last battles that they're which one would you say is sort of the one that for the guys is the most important one or most impactful one?
Real quick, Appleton's gone by the time Honey Hill happens. His injury is part of an earlier, same exact plan is to try to cut the Savannah and and Charleston Railroad, but it's an earlier attempt at that. Um, I mean, it's Wagner because of the casualties. Grimble's Landing, which is one of the major one before, sometimes called the Battle of Grimble's Landing.
Mm,
Um, would they did good work there. It's in the movie. They bail out the white regiment,
mm,
protect them keep them from getting cut off and captured. So that may have gotten them some press,
mm,
but ultimately it's Wagner that gets much more press.
mm,
So I think particularly for us in the modern times, and I'm trying to pull away from the movie because that's the emphasis, but
mm,
even without the movie, I think that's the one that is more impactful for historians and historical study
mm,
because of the level of demonstration
mm,
of their willingness and ability to
mm,
fight and die
mm,
for the cause, for their cause.
mm.
So
Yeah,
I think that's the easy answer, but it's also the right answer, at least in my mind.
yeah, and I would agree for two other reasons, right? Why it has to be Wagner. Um, Even though, right, we really want to emphasize that that wasn't the end of the story,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
But it has to be Wagner for two other reasons. The first is, right, the popular narrative in the white community, right, on the front end of this is that, right, African Americans couldn't soldier like white men,
Mm,
right? They couldn't do it in the same way to the same degree of
mm,
proficiency, those types of things. Um, but the other thing that's I think important and it is in the movie, right, is Darien,
mm,
right? The stigma of Darien.
mm,
And it's there to the point that even the soldiers, the few accounts that we do have, the soldiers themselves disagree about whether they should or shouldn't
mm,
be engaged in that kind of warfare,
mm,
right? And so, but that's what's been in the press, right, related to the 54th before Wagner.
mm.
So I agree with Jim there, but I would add those two reasons as why the answer has to be Wagner.
Mm. Like, I didn't pick up on it, but is there any perception within the regiment? Because I can't recall now if you point. I think you do mention that there are new recruits arriving to kind of supplement the ranks eventually. Is there any kind
Yes,
of like moment where it's sort of like there's a hierarchy, I guess would be the word choice here? Is that sort of like, well, because you weren't at Wagner, you're not as much part of the regiment for kind of it's very simplistically put, but sort of like because we struggled through the trauma of Wagner, we're kind of different from the rest of the regiment that comes later in as recruits.
I didn't detect any of that, at least not in Appleton's memoir. And I would think part of the reason why is because their losses are so heavy.
Mm.
So they're not just replacing 50 guys. You know, and so they start out with 1,000 men, right? That's their full strength of their regiment. But by the time they actually lead the assault on Wagner, their effective fighting force is down to 600 and something.
Mm.
And then they lose another, I don't remember the exact number, but it's 200 and something more men, right? That they lose at Wagner, right? Either wounded or killed, captured, right? Just flat out missing. And so they're replacing a substantial chunk of the regiment. So what the only place that I can think of that somewhat gets close to that is when they finally get paid. The
Mm.
guys who've been there longer, right? Yeah, I think it comes through in a sort of a weird way there
Mm.
because they're getting more money,
Right.
right, than the guys who are newer. But I didn't detect, and I don't know, Jim, if you saw any of that anywhere, but I
No,
think
I
that's
didn't.
part of why they're replacing so many men.
Mm.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. And they're also replacing a lot of officers too.
Right.
I mean, officer ranks were really thinned at Wagner. And Appleton eventually survives that, but I mean, he too was replaced because he's severely injured. And but I didn't see any of that. And maybe he didn't see it. I
Mm,
mean, it certainly didn't record it as far as I recall as we went through it. But then again, maybe he didn't see it
mm,
as well. I mean, he's not one of the men too, so.
right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? He's what happens in their tent, for example. Like
Mm,
he's not necessarily seeing.
right. They kind of banter between soldiers of like what they're doing in their free time when there's no one around. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so I think we've been talking for almost an hour and a half at this stage, so I want to wrap slowly up, even though there's so much fascinating things in your books that we could talk probably for another hour. Um, but what was the most fascinating thing that you when you edited this book that you discovered? Like those things that you found like just the most interesting like story or something.
For me, the thing I found most unique for sure, because I hadn't seen it before, is his detailed commentary about his traumatic brain injury. You don't see that in a lot. I mean, as far as I know, I don't recall seeing it in any memoir. I
Mm,
mean, he's hallucinating, and he
mm,
talks about seeing little green men, and you don't see that in a Civil War memoir, especially. And that comes from not the combination of the heat stroke, but especially the cannonball that just
mm,
misses killing him.
mm,
And then when he falls to the ground and he's limp and just slaps down on the ground there,
mm,
and he's out for days. And as he's coming
mm,
back slowly, he's hallucinating while he's there. He goes home. He's under the care. His father's a doctor.
mm,
He's under the care of his father and others. And of course, we were fortunate to find in the compiled service record the letters back.
mm,
I mean, he never goes back after he leaves in '64 from
mm,
this injury. And they're writing like, he's still not, he's got, I think the dad pointed out, there's still the head injuries causing a number of things, including, interestingly enough, I think he had some diarrhea issues. And,
mm,
there's some interesting side effects from that much of that he comments, not all of that we found
mm,
records, but he comments on a lot of that. And for me, that was really interesting to see something I had not seen in a memoir before to talk about that kind of stuff.
mm.
That is actually surprising because, like I said, this is all based on the letters. And so I have to wonder what his wife is thinking in reading some of these letters about, there's this little green man that's standing at the foot of my bed. It's like, you have to wonder, it's like, and she's probably not getting the full story either about like the real nature of his injuries. And he's writing these letters that, far as I can tell, right, they're not censored, so they're going straight to her, and he's describing these hallucinations, so she's probably terrified out of her mind. Um, so that is, I think, important, right? That you don't expect to see something like that in a memoir like this.
Well, I mean, I guess there's a movie to be made, right? That like Little Green Man that impacts the outcome of the Civil War. Um, but he gets a pension, right? That after the war, that based on that injury or not?
Uh, I saw her apply for something. I don't remember. I assume he did. I mean, I don't recall seeing the paperwork on that, but she's in there asking after he passes away.
Hmm,
And I'd have to go back and look to see if he is already getting it at that time. I mean, he's certainly eligible.
hmm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Um, but Gene cheated out of saying what he found the most fascinating in the book. He just piggybacked on yours, Jim.
Um, but I am thinking that is a good one that Jen pointed out, right? The thing that first struck me the most, right, is here's a guy who's going off to war,
Mm.
And and not knowing the outcome, and he's writing about seeing the house of uh, Fanny Kimball Butler, right, in South Carolina,
Mm.
right. So she was the actress, right, that was married to Pierce Butler, the prominent slave owner, and so forth, and had that book had, well, I don't know if it was necessarily a book, but her publication comes out right in '63, and so here, okay, so I'm heading into this meat grinder of Charleston,
Mm.
right? But the thing that's on my mind is, hey, there's Fanny Kimball's house. Um,
Mm.
and he's describing, the different flowers and right and
Mm.
all this stuff, and he's drawing pictures of things that he sees, and um, yeah, that to me, I, that just, I don't know. The first time I read the memoir, it's like, this seems weird to me that this is where he's heading, but this is what he's taking time to write about.
Mm.
Yeah,
Appreciate.
Gene brings up a point that we should note is that he drew a lot in the letters and in
Mhm.
the memoir. Everything we've included in there, it was he created that either in the letter or well, I think they were all the ones we used were all from the memoir, and there are a lot more of them.
Mm. Was that a press decision to not include everything, or was that your decision to be like, okay, we're just taking
Uh,
a few of these?
I think meeting of the minds both. I mean, they certainly had a
Mm.
limit on the number of illustrations we can include for sure, and that
Right.
was fractional. And we wanted to make sure there's a lot of the images too, which he has in his collection there. I mean, you
Mm.
can find them other places of the individuals, but he had copies too, which is sort of interesting. That's part of the curating of the history of the regiment. That his wife starts by cutting out newspaper coverage while he's
Mm.
serving, and he keeps doing after his service, but he also has all these images of everybody, and so he had to get them from somebody.
Right.
So he was is very intentional.
Mm.
Yes, and he everything that's in the memoir was in the letters, right, in terms of the drawings. Now, what's in the memoir, he might have, because he had more time, and
Mm.
right, so it's a little more detailed. But having compared them side by side, yeah, it's. But I mean, some of it is just, they're kind of neat to see,
Mhm.
right? But a sketch of an insect, for example, um, not crucial to the story we're telling here.
I can see that, yes. And I think like it's been a while, a couple of days now, and a lot of that's going on, but I think like for Wagner, he even shows where he was during the battle, right? Of
Yeah,
like the kind of
yeah.
I was there and then I walked this way and like he was it's incredible detail that he puts into these.
But you'll also notice that, right, because when he comes back, right, when he gets back, right, Fort Wagner is in Union hands, and so
Right.
he can actually go to the
Yes.
fort. Um, and then he comments about all that. You get some
Mhm.
of that, how they feel about after the fact, right, because
Mhm.
of what happened. Now they're here later. Um, and so that was another powerful moment, at least for me, is
Mm.
the first time he gets back to the fort after having been wounded there.
Well, and he also something that I wouldn't say it's powerful for me, but something that did strike me is that they talk about the bodies that are buried when they're back there.
Mm.
Once the Union has control, then they can see where mass graves of dead, Union
Mm.
soldiers were.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, they were. This isn't necessarily in there, right? But because of the way they are approaching Wagner, right? So they're doing those
Mm.
parallels, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so they have 5 sets of parallels, right? And so um, they occasionally, as they're digging those trenches, they uncovered dead bodies on a pretty regular basis.
Well, it part of the course of that battlefield, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, a very narrow
Hmm.
battlefield.
Yes, yes. And I guess we could bring the movie back into there of like the wrong perspective of the approach that they use there in the movie, but let's not. So what would you do differently? Is there anything you would do differently about the book now that it's been out for a little and you kind of have a little had a little time to reflect on it?
No, actually, that's a really good question, but hmm.
Well, I think for me, and this is just because, and I just mentioned this to Jim the other day, one of the things that I don't think, well, I think we could have done better, right? The assault on Wagner. I think if I was to rewrite that now, right, as opposed to, because I mean, we wrote that a couple of years ago at this point. Um, uh, how this fits into the larger strategy of what the union was trying to do,
Mm,
right? Um, because the way we constructed this, we're trying to give context to the reader so that they understand, right, this chunk of his
hmm
memoir, sort of this is what's happening, right,
Right.
around them. Um, but we didn't, because that's how we were approaching it. We didn't try to situate it in this much larger, right, framework, particularly of
Mm,
strategy.
right.
And I don't know if that necessarily be useful, but if I was to redo it, I would probably put at least a little bit more of that in there.
Yeah, and I would agree. And as Gene said, we've been talking about this. I mean, we're working on project follow up on this. Um,
I had a feeling you were gonna say that.
well, and so a little bit different. But another thing is, I'm happy to talk about that. But also, I think we could have done a little more. I think we do okay, but a little more on the bigger picture on the impact on the struggle for African American rights,
Hmm
where this fits in. I think there's room for that too, where we could have done more. But that's not what our intent was.
Right.
I mean, we gave enough, I
hmm
think, to contextualize Appleton, but could you do more? Sure. Although with a memoir, there's the challenge. How far afield do you get? How broad do you take it
hmm
versus how do you, or keeping the focus on the memoir? And
Yeah,
so
that's
we opted to keep the focus.
yeah, I think that's a critical point, right? Is Appleton? This needs to be that story that Appleton tells, not Jim and Jane, right?
I
We'll
like
get to
your
that one
stories
later.
too. I mean, uh, but Jim, you opened the door there. So last time you started with an annotation of letters from an Oregon regiment, and then you brought out a book about that Oregon regiment. So is this going to be the same thing of like you bring out a memoir with Gene about um, Appleton, and then in 2 years I'm going to have you back on here with a biography of Appleton?
Uh, yes, we're doing something else. No, on the biography of Appleton, I think we exhausted what we can do on the post and pre-war. There's just not enough there, unfortunately. I actually think if you pulled the beginning and the intro and the epilogue out, there's a pretty good, I don't know, it's about 35-page biography of the guy, and I think it's about all you can get. But we are following this up with I don't want to call it a regimental history, although I think that's how it'll get categorized. But we're looking at the intersection of, at this point, we're talking about 11 individuals that intersected with the 54th, mostly individuals in it. So, for obvious reasons, Shaw and Appleton, because lots of primary material,
hmm
Gooding and Stevens also, because of the letters and the books that are based on their letters. And then another of the officers. So, but also an individual that was in Charleston, even though the service goes beyond that, but you get a civilian perspective on being on the receiving end, and also Confederate officer that was also in Charleston. Um, the idea is to look at this not in that regimental history sense, but in a humanized sense through the human experience of all perspectives. We're still struggling on we want a family, but there's just not a great paper trail. You know, I've reached out to people that have done material on the Shaw family and have been
Mm,
assured there's just not enough there, unfortunately.
mm.
But
Yeah. Oh, looks like Jim just froze.
Yeah. I can put a Quaker oatmeal over his face for a moment.
That
Um,
would be funny. Um, one of the things that's sort of odd about this is that we don't have, so we have Appleton's letters to his wife, but we don't have hers to him.
oh, so they didn't survive.
Well, they're not in the collection with the rest of his stuff.
Huh.
So it's possible they're out there, maybe not.
Huh.
Um, if they are, I don't know where they are.
Huh.
Um, but I would like to. That's part of what Jim was alluding to, right? Is trying to get some of this more humanistic piece, or the human element
Right.
um, of what people like that, right, are going through, right, in connection with the 54th. So, yeah, I mean, I understand why Appleton didn't necessarily keep them,
Mm, sure.
right? But it's yeah. So what happens to the letters that these guys are getting from home?
Mm, right.
Um, if if we could find those, that would be, I think, significant.
Yeah.
Jim, I was talking about the fact that we don't have any of Mary's letters to John,
yeah,
right? But we have all of his to her.
Hmm.
well, let's try to be fair to poor John Appleton. It's pretty hard to preserve those when you're out in service, and he was wounded twice, so who knows
Seeing
what
Little
happened to
Green
Yes.
his.
Man.
Yeah, the little green man took him.
Uh,
Um,
Well, and
it's
one of his trunks does go missing.
mm,
Um, he doesn't mention that in the memoir. It's in the letters, right? Because he's
mm,
actually kind of upset about it.
mm,
Um, so one of his, I think I just from the description I took it to be a trunk of
mm,
of his things, right? His personal things. After he gets wounded is when it goes missing.
mm.
Yeah, I lost connections there, so I don't know if you cover this, Gene, but there is obviously Massachusetts Historical Society has the Emilio collection and the 54th collection. There's a lot to see there that we have not seen. But that'll again, from what we've read, at least what I recall from all the stuff we've read, the source material will be very much on service
Mm,
by the soldiers. We're still looking for that home front perspective.
mm,
And I don't know if we're going to find a great one. We can find some, but a great one. I mean, the James family certainly wrote a ton after the war about other things. And could you piece,
mm.
you know, together, Wilkie James is maybe the least famous of his very famous family. And, could we piece together their experience as
Mm.
their brother and son was off at war?
Wow.
Possibly. We're struggling with that side of it.
Yes, even Frederick Douglass, who has a son in the regiment, like I yet to find outside of just literally a handful of letters, anything to from
Mm.
Frederick Douglass or to his son Lewis.
Oh, wow.
And he
Yeah,
was there. He was
Mm,
right. He cut his teeth at Grimble's Landing,
mm,
and he fought at Wagner. Eventually, he gets promoted and transfers out, um, but yeah, we couldn't even find anything from Frederick Douglass to Lewis Douglass about the 54th, right, in the service that they're in. So it's really kind of odd.
mm.
well, and,
Not.
and Douglas doesn't make a lot of comments after the war, or after the war about it either, because we've been looking. Because he's another person we'd like to include
Mm,
in our sort of cast, if you will, of individuals
mm,
that are intersecting with the regiment. Is Frederick Douglass, because his role
mm-hmm.
in pushing for the creation of
Right.
black regiments, and so he's valuable that way from
Mm,
his perspective. His importance. If he just doesn't write a lot, he's got the Douglas Monthly, but that stops before Wagner.
Yeah.
and then he doesn't seem to say a lot afterwards. And
Hmm.
It's because he quit, right? So he was recruiting for the 54th, right?
Hmm.
So Douglas is connected with Stearns, and so he's recruiting for the 54th, but um, he doesn't think things are developing as the way they ought to, especially Lincoln's reluctance to announce a policy of reciprocity when it
Hmm.
comes to black soldiers. And so,
Hmm.
and I've seen the letter where Douglas writes to Stearns. He's like, I quit. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he's like,
Hmm.
I'm after this point, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Hmm.
Um, but yet his son is serving in the regiment, and he says very little about it.
Hmm. Well, that sounds like a incredible project. And let me see. Last time it took 5 years, Jim, so it's 2025. So I guess I'd see you in 2030.
there's
If
two of
I'm,
us now. It's going to be half the time.
I'll still give you 2028 then, or
Okay.
29. I know how presses
Uh,
work.
well, yeah, yeah, we're working on it now, but we haven't contacted anybody. And this will be important point. I think we're interested in doing it on a more popular
Mm,
target audience
right.
as well, not just academic.
Yeah.
Academic rigor, but with a more popular tone to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of like maybe a Norton kind of press type.
Something like that. Sure.
No, that sounds great. So I look forward to having you two back if and hopefully I will still be doing the podcast at that time in 4 years or so. And then I will let you have your ugly ties.
I will have a whole slew more of them by then. And Gene's got some pretty bad ones too.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to look forward to those and the ugliest possible you can put on for that day.
Oh, you have no idea what we
That's
could do.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a
Some of them
feeling.
are pretty bad. They should be like outlawed. They're that bad.
Oh my, we have a fun day today. But thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And if you're still with us listening, this was the book Waging War for Freedom with the 54's Massachusetts, the Civil War memoir of John W. M. Appleton, Potomac Books, Nebraska, University of Nebraska Press. So
Thanks for
thank
having us,
you.
Niels.
Thank you.